The first snowflake landed on her nose, just as the hammer slipped from her frozen fingers, clattering against the half-built frame of what was supposed to be a chicken coop, but looked more like a wooden skeleton waiting to collapse. January in Westcliffe, Colorado had come early in 1883, bringing with it winds that cut through wool like knives and temperatures that made every breath visible in the thin mountain air. Jessica Lawson wiped her reddened cheek with the back of her gloved hand and bent to retrieve the hammer, her back protesting after 3 hours of work that had yielded frustratingly little progress. She was 23 years old, alone on 40 acres of stubborn land, and rapidly discovering that building a chicken coop in 2 feet of snow required skills her late father had never taught her before consumption took him 6 months ago. The sound of hoofbeats came muffled through the falling snow, and Jessica straightened, one hand instinctively moving to the rifle leaning against the nearest fence post. Visitors were rare this far up the mountain, and rarer still were the ones who came with good intentions. Through the white curtain of snowfall, a figure emerged on horseback, tall in the saddle, wearing a heavy sheepskin coat dark with moisture. The horse was a sturdy bay gelding, and the man sat easy despite the weather, like someone who had long ago made peace with whatever hardships the mountains threw at him. "That coop is going to collapse come first thaw," the stranger called out, his voice carrying a hint of amusement that made Jessica bristle even as she tightened her grip on the hammer. "You have got the support beams angled all wrong." "Then keep riding," Jessica shot back, her breath forming clouds between them. "I did not ask for commentary from passing strangers." The man swung down from his horse with fluid grace, looping the reins around her fence post without asking permission. Up close, he was younger than his confident bearing suggested, perhaps 28 or so, with dark hair touched with snow and eyes the color of creek water in summer. There was a quiet competence in the way he moved, assessing her work with a practiced gaze that managed to be both critical and somehow not unkind. "Lucas Northwood," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "I run cattle about 5 miles northeast of here, over near Muddy Creek. And before you tell me again to keep riding, I should mention that I helped build most of the barns between here and Rosita, including the new livery in town. That structure there is going to kill your chickens, assuming the walls do not crush them first." Jessica wanted to argue, but the truth was plain in the sagging joints and uneven planks. She had been working from memory and stubbornness, two materials that built nothing sound. "Jessica Lawson," she said finally, the words coming reluctant. "And if you are going to criticize, you might as well make yourself useful." Something flickered in Lucas's expression, approval maybe, or respect for her directness. He moved to examine the frame more closely, running gloved hands along the joints she had tried to nail together. Snow collected on his shoulders and hat, but he seemed not to notice, focused entirely on the problem before him. "You have the right idea with the dimensions," he said after a moment. "But these corner posts need to be set deeper, and you are going to need cross-bracing to handle the snow load. How many chickens are you planning to house?" "Dozen to start," Jessica said, moving to stand beside him. This close, she caught the scent of leather and wood smoke, horse and honest work. "I inherited this land from my father, along with enough debts to bury me if I cannot make it produce. Chickens seem the fastest way to start generating income, but I cannot afford to hire help." Lucas nodded slowly, his gaze moving from the coop to the small cabin behind it, taking in the thin curl of smoke from the chimney, the neatly stacked woodpile, the vegetable garden buried now under snow, but clearly tended with care. "My ranch is snowed in for the next 2 weeks at least," he said. "My foreman and the hands can manage the feeding without me. I could use a project that does not involve hauling hay through drifts." "I cannot pay you," Jessica said bluntly, though something in her chest tightened at the offer. "Did not ask for payment." Lucas pulled his gloves tighter and reached for the hammer in her hand. "But I would take coffee and maybe a warm meal when we break. That cabin of yours looks like it has a working stove." Jessica hesitated, suspicion warring with practicality, and something else, something that noticed the capable way his hands gripped the hammer, the steadiness in his creek water eyes. She had been alone for half a year, trusting no one because Westcliffe was full of men who saw a woman alone as an opportunity. But there was no guile in Lucas Northwood's face, just honest competence and an offer of help that asked for nothing but coffee in return. "The coffee is terrible," she warned. "My father always said I made it strong enough to strip paint." "Good," Lucas said, and there might have been the ghost of a smile at the corner of his mouth. "The weak stuff is just brown water pretending to be useful." They worked through the afternoon as snow continued to fall in thick, lazy flakes that transformed the world into something hushed and white. Lucas dismantled what Jessica had built, but he explained as he went, showing her where the joints needed to align, how to angle the nails for maximum hold, the importance of measuring twice and cutting once. His teaching had none of the condescension she had endured from other men, no assumption that her ignorance was permanent or proof of female inadequacy. He simply showed her what needed doing, then handed her the tools to do it while he moved to the next task. "Why are you really helping?" Jessica asked as they wrestled a heavy support beam into position. Her arms burned with effort, but she refused to let him bear the weight alone. Lucas considered the question as they maneuvered the beam upright. "I lost my parents to cholera 8 years back," he said finally. "Took over the ranch when I was barely 20. Did not know a damn thing about running cattle or managing land. My neighbors could have left me to fail, and some of them wanted to, figured they could buy my acreage for pennies when I went under. But a few good people helped me instead, taught me what I needed to know, never asked for anything but that I do the same for someone else down the line. Seems like today that someone is you." The beam slotted into place with a solid thunk, and they stepped back, breathing hard. Jessica studied Lucas in the dimming light, seeing past the capable rancher to the scared young man he must have been, alone and grieving, and determined not to fail. She recognized that determination because it looked back at her from the mirror every morning. "I appreciate it," she said quietly. "More than you know." They worked until the light failed completely. Then Jessica led Lucas to the cabin, where she stoked the fire and set coffee to boil while he washed up at the basin. The cabin was small but clean, one room with a sleeping loft and a stone fireplace that her father had built with his own hands. Dried herbs hung from the rafters, and the few pieces of furniture were simple but well made. It was not much, but it was hers, paid for with her father's life, and her own determination not to let his sacrifice mean nothing. "Your father was Marcus Lawson," Lucas said, not quite a question. He had settled into one of the two chairs at the small table, cradling the coffee mug in both hands. "I met him once, maybe 2 years back, at the cattle auction in Cannon City. He spoke about you, about bringing you out here once he had the land settled." Jessica nodded, throat tight. "He wanted to give me something that could not be taken away, property in my own name. He had seen too many women left with nothing when their husbands died or proved worthless, but the consumption took him before he could teach me half of what I needed to know." "He taught you stubbornness," Lucas said, and this time there was definitely warmth in his voice. "That counts for more than people think. Plenty of folks would have sold out and moved back east by now." "There is nothing back east for me," Jessica said. "My mother died when I was 12, and my father and I were all the family each other had. This land is the last piece of him I have left. I will not give it up because things are hard." They ate a simple meal of beans and cornbread, and Lucas proved himself easy company, sharing stories of ranch life and the characters who populated Westcliffe and the surrounding country. He spoke of old Pete, who ran the mercantile and could talk the legs off a chair, of the widow Martinez, who made the best tamales in 3 counties, of the ongoing feud between 2 prospectors who both claimed to have struck silver in the same played-out mine. His stories were vivid and funny, painting a picture of a community Jessica had barely interacted with in her months of isolated struggle. "You should come to town more," Lucas said as the evening wore on. "There is a dance at the community hall once a month, and the church has socials. People would welcome you." "I am not sure I know how to be social anymore," Jessica admitted. I spent the last 2 years nursing my father, and since coming here, I have been too busy trying to survive to think about much else. Surviving is easier when you are not doing it alone, Lucas said gently. I learned that the hard way. When Lucas finally rose to leave, collecting his coat and hat, the cabin felt suddenly smaller, the silence louder. He paused at the door, snowflakes swirling in around him. I will be back tomorrow if the weather holds, he said. We can finish the frame and start on the walls. Should have your coop done in 3, maybe 4 days if we push. You do not have to, Jessica said, but she wanted him to, wanted it with a fierceness that surprised her. I know, Lucas said, meeting her eyes, but I am going to anyway. He rode off into the darkness, and Jessica stood in the doorway long after the sound of hoofbeats faded, watching snow erase his tracks like they had never been there at all. But something had shifted, some tectonic plate beneath the frozen ground of her isolation. For the first time since her father died, she did not feel quite so alone. Lucas returned the next morning, just after dawn, riding up through fresh snow that reached his horse's knees. He had brought additional supplies, lumber and nails that Jessica had not been able to afford, and when she tried to protest, he waved her off. I am overstocked at the ranch, he said, which they both knew was a lie. Might as well put it to use. They fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side with the kind of comfortable silence that usually took years to develop. Lucas continued to teach as they built, explaining not just the how but the why, turning construction into education. Jessica was a quick study, her hands learning the feel of properly seated nails, the satisfying bite of a saw cutting true. By midday, the frame stood solid and square, ready for walls. Over lunch, eaten sitting on upturned buckets near the worksite despite the cold, Lucas asked about her plans beyond chickens. This land has good water, he observed. That creek running through your property does not freeze solid even in winter. You could run cattle, maybe 20 head to start, or horses if you have got the touch for it. I do not know anything about cattle, Jessica said, and horses terrify me. My father was a carpenter back in Pennsylvania, and I took after him. I understand wood and nails, not animals. Chickens are animals, Lucas pointed out, amusement coloring his words. Chickens are small and stupid, and they do not kick, Jessica countered. Very different from a half-ton steer with horns. Fair enough, Lucas allowed. But if you ever change your mind, I could teach you. Cattle are not so different from construction, really. You provide solid structure, food, water, protection, and they do the work of growing. The money comes later, but it comes steady if you are patient. Jessica considered this, studying the land that stretched white and unbroken toward the mountains. I will need to diversify eventually, she admitted. Eggs and meat birds alone will not clear my father's debts, but right now I need something fast, something I can manage alone. You are not alone, Lucas said quietly. Not anymore. The words hung between them, weighted with meaning that went beyond construction help. Jessica met his gaze and found something there that made her breath catch, the intensity of attention that said she mattered, that her struggles were not invisible, that he saw her as more than just a project or a neighbor in need. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Why? She asked, needing to understand. Why me? There must be a dozen people between here and town who could use help. Lucas was quiet for a long moment, his coffee mug forgotten in his hands. When he spoke, his words came careful, like he was feeling his way across ice. I have been alone on that ranch for 8 years, he said. Built it from nothing, turned it into something that works, something that will last. But I built it all alone, and that started to feel like maybe I had gotten too good at being solitary. When I saw you out here yesterday, trying so damn hard to build something in the middle of a snowstorm, too stubborn to quit even when the nails would not seat right and your hands were shaking from cold, I recognized something, Or maybe I just wanted an excuse to talk to someone who understood what it meant to fight for every inch of ground you gain. That is a lonely way to live, Jessica said softly. Yes, Lucas agreed. It is. They returned to work, but something had been acknowledged. A door opened that neither could close again. As the afternoon progressed and the walls of the chicken coop took shape, Jessica found herself hyper-aware of Lucas's proximity, the brush of his shoulder against hers when they worked close, the sound of his breathing in the cold air, the way snowflakes caught in his dark hair and melted slowly. It had been so long since she had allowed herself to think of anything beyond survival, beyond the next task and the next debt payment. The possibility of something more felt dangerous and necessary, like spring after a hard winter. By the time darkness forced them to stop, 3 walls stood complete, and the fourth was half finished. They had made remarkable progress, and the structure now looked like what it was meant to be, rather than a collection of wishful thinking and misaligned boards. Lucas stretched, back cracking, and surveyed their work with evident satisfaction. Tomorrow we finish the walls and start on the roof, he said. Day after, we will be putting nesting boxes and roosts together. You will have chickens before the week is out. Inside the cabin, warming themselves by the fire, they talked until late. Lucas told her about the early days of his ranch, the mistakes he had made, the cattle he had lost to weather and predators and his own ignorance. He spoke of the loneliness of those first winters, snowed in with only his own thoughts for company, learning the hard way that success meant nothing if there was no one to share it with. Jessica shared her own stories, the slow agony of watching her father die by inches, the terror of arriving in Westcliffe alone with nothing but a land deed and a trunk of belongings, the small victories that had kept her going through the darkest times. I was engaged once, Jessica confessed, as the fire burned low. Back in Pennsylvania. A banker's son, perfectly respectable, exactly who my father hoped I would marry. But when my father got sick, when we lost everything paying for doctors and medicine that did not help, that perfectly respectable man disappeared. Said he could not marry someone with no prospects, no dowry. Like my father dying was somehow my failure. Then he was a fool, Lucas said, with quiet conviction. And you are well rid of him. I know, Jessica said. But it made me careful about trust, about who I let close. I understand that, Lucas replied. After my parents died, half the ranchers in the valley tried to swindle me, figured I was too young and too grief-struck to fight back. I learned to trust actions over words, to judge people by what they did when they thought no one important was watching. And what do you see when you watch me? Jessica asked, then immediately wished she could take the question back, afraid of its vulnerability. But Lucas did not hesitate. I see someone who keeps fighting when fighting seems pointless, someone who would rather break than bend, someone who loves fiercely even when it costs everything. He paused, then added softly, I see someone worth knowing. Jessica's throat tightened with emotion she had kept locked away for months. You barely know me at all. Then I would like to change that, Lucas said. If you will let me. The question hung in the warm air between them, full of possibility and risk. Jessica thought about her resolve to stay alone, to trust no one, to build her life with walls as thick as the ones on her cabin. But walls kept out cold and danger, and they also kept out warmth and connection and the possibility of something that made the fighting worthwhile. I would like that, she said quietly. I would like that very much. Lucas smiled then, a real smile that transformed his serious face into something open and young. He reached across the small space between their chairs and took her hand, his grip warm even through the calluses earned by hard work. They sat like that as the fire died to embers, two people who had learned to survive alone, discovering that maybe, just maybe, they did not have to anymore. The next 3 days passed in a blur of work and words, and slowly building trust. The chicken coop took shape with satisfying speed now that Jessica understood what she was doing, and Lucas's experience guided the more complex elements. They worked through snow and cold wind, through hands that went numb and backs that ached, finding satisfaction in the tangible progress of their labor. But the real building was happening in the spaces between hammer strikes, in the conversations that ranged from trivial to profound, in the gradual dismantling of the walls they had both built around their battered hearts. Lucas told her about his dreams for the ranch, plans to expand into horse breeding, to build a proper house instead of the rough bunkhouse where he currently lived. He spoke of wanting something permanent, something that would last beyond his own lifetime, legacy and family and roots, driven deep into mountain soil. Jessica shared her own hopes, modest by comparison but no less fierce, a working farm that could support her, property that was truly hers, independence that no man could take away unless she chose to give it. "What if you meet someone?" Lucas asked on the third day as they fitted shingles to the coop's roof. "What if you marry? Would you give up that independence?" Jessica considered the question carefully, aware of the weight beneath it. "I will not give up ownership," she said finally. "This land is mine, legal and clear, and I will not sign it over to any man, no matter what promises he makes. But if I married someone who respected that, someone who wanted to build beside me instead of over me, then I suppose independence could look like partnership instead of isolation." "That seems fair," Lucas said quietly. "A smart man would be honored to build beside someone like you." "Are you a smart man, Lucas Northwood?" Jessica asked, meeting his eyes across the roof slats. "I would like to think so," he replied. "But I have been known to be a fool when something matters enough." They finished the roof as afternoon lights slanted golden across the snow, and when Lucas climbed down the ladder, he stood close to Jessica, his hands settling on her shoulders. "It is done," he said. "Your chicken coop is solid enough to handle anything this mountain can throw at it. You did good work here." "We did good work," Jessica corrected, intensely aware of his nearness, the warmth radiating from his body in the cold air. "I could not have finished it without you." "Maybe that is the point," Lucas said softly. "Maybe some things are not meant to be done alone." He kissed her then, gentle and questioning, giving her space to pull away if she chose. But Jessica had spent too many months in cold isolation, and Lucas's kiss was warm and alive and full of promise. She leaned into it, her hands coming up to rest against his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady under her palms. The kiss deepened, transformed from question to answer, acknowledgement that what had started as a stranger helping with a chicken coop had become something far more significant. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "I should probably tell you that I have been half in love with you since you told me to keep writing," he said, voice rough with emotion. "I know it is fast. I know you have reason to be careful, but I am too old to pretend I do not feel what I feel." "I am not good at careful anymore," Jessica admitted. "I have been trying to protect myself for so long that I forgot what it felt like to want something beyond mere survival. But I want this. I want you." They stood together in the snow as the sun set fire to the western mountains, holding each other against the cold and against the loneliness that had defined both their lives for too long. The chicken coop stood finished and solid behind them, proof that sometimes help arrived exactly when needed, that stubbornness and skill combined could build things meant to last. Lucas stayed for dinner again, and this time when he left, it was with plans to return the next day, not to build, but simply to see her, to continue what they had started. Jessica watched him ride away and felt not loneliness, but anticipation, the first stirrings of hope that her life in Westcliffe might include more than just survival. The next weeks passed in a rhythm of visits and deepening connection. Lucas came to see Jessica every few days, sometimes bringing supplies she needed, sometimes just his company and conversation. They took walks along the snow-covered creek, talked by her fire, shared meals and stories, and the gradual revelation of two people learning each other. Lucas introduced her to his ranch, showing her the cattle operation he had built from nothing, the sturdy buildings and well-managed herds that spoke of skill and dedication. Jessica saw the pride he took in his work and understood it because it mirrored her own. He also brought her to town, introducing her to the community she had held at arm's length. She met old Pete at the mercantile, who did indeed talk constantly, but with such genuine friendliness that it was impossible to mind. She attended a church social and was welcomed by the women there, drawn into conversations about gardens and preserves and the challenges of mountain living. Widow Martinez did make remarkable tamales and insisted on teaching Jessica her secrets. Slowly, Jessica's world expanded beyond her 40 acres and her father's debts, encompassing neighbors and possibility and belonging. In late February, Lucas asked her to the monthly dance at the community hall. Jessica had not danced since before her father's illness, had forgotten the pleasure of music and movement and being held in strong arms that knew how to lead. Lucas proved a skilled dancer, guiding her through reels and waltzes with easy competence, while half the town watched with knowing smiles. They made a handsome couple, the tall rancher and the determined woman from up the mountain, and more than one person mentioned how good it was to see Lucas finally showing interest in someone after all his years alone. "They are talking about us," Jessica observed as they took a break, sharing a cup of punch that was too sweet and slightly warm. "Let them talk," Lucas said cheerfully. "They have been trying to marry me off for years. They are probably relieved I finally found someone to take me off their hands." "Is that what is happening?" Jessica asked, heart beating faster. "You being taken off hands?" Lucas set down the punch cup and turned to face her fully. "What is happening is that I am falling completely and permanently in love with you," he said, voice low and serious despite the music and laughter around them. "What is happening is that I cannot imagine going back to how things were before I found you building that ridiculous chicken coop in a snowstorm. What is happening is that I want to marry you, build with you, spend every day of whatever time we are given working beside you and sleeping next to you, and being the kind of partner you deserve." Jessica felt tears prick her eyes, overwhelmed by the directness of his declaration. "That is quite a speech." "It is the truth," Lucas said simply, "and I am done being careful with the truth when it matters this much. So I am asking Jessica Lawson, will you marry me? Will you let me be the man who builds beside you instead of over you? Will you take a chance on us?" Around them, the dance continued, but Jessica was aware only of Lucas, of his creek water eyes steady on hers, of the calloused hand that had helped her build not just a chicken coop, but the foundation of something that could last. She thought of her father, of his determination to give her something that could not be taken away. He had given her land, but Lucas was offering something more precious, partnership that honored her independence while ending her isolation. "Yes," she said, the word emerging clear and certain. "Yes, I will marry you." Lucas lifted her off her feet, spinning her around while she laughed, and the whole community hall erupted in cheers and applause, because apparently everyone had been watching and waiting. They set the date for early May, after the snow melted but before spring work overwhelmed them both. It would be a simple ceremony at the church in Westcliffe, followed by a celebration at the community hall where they had gotten engaged. The months between engagement and wedding passed in a flurry of planning and preparation. Lucas spent his free time at Jessica's cabin, helping her expand the garden, repair the winter damage to the fences, make improvements that would serve them both once they combined their properties. They decided that Jessica would keep legal ownership of her land exactly as she had insisted, but Lucas would work it alongside his ranch, creating one larger operation that benefited from pooled resources and shared labor. Jessica's chickens arrived in March, a dozen pullets that took to their new coop with satisfying enthusiasm. Within weeks, she was collecting eggs daily, selling the surplus in town, and starting to see actual income from her efforts. It was modest, but it was hers, earned through her own work and the sturdy coop that she and Lucas had built together in the snow. In April, Lucas brought Jessica to his ranch and showed her the work he had been doing in secret. He had expanded the small bunkhouse, adding rooms and a real kitchen, transforming it into a proper house suitable for a family. "I know you want to keep your cabin," he said as Jessica walked through the new space, touching the smooth walls and sturdy furniture with wondering hands. But I thought maybe we could split our time, live at your place during the busy season when we need to be close to both operations, and stay here during winter when the snow makes travel difficult. This way we both have homes, both have roots, and neither has to give up what they built alone. You did all this for me? Jessica asked, throat tight with emotion. I did it for us, Lucas corrected. Because I want to build a life big enough for all our dreams, yours and mine together. They married on May 4th, a bright spring day when the mountains were still snow-capped, but the valleys had exploded into green life. Jessica wore a simple dress of cream muslin that the widow Martinez had helped her sew, and Lucas stood at the altar in his best suit, looking nervous and happy in equal measure. The church was packed with neighbors and friends, people from all over the valley who had come to celebrate the union of two determined souls who had fought through loneliness to find each other. The ceremony was brief, the vows spoken with voices that shook slightly with emotion. When the minister pronounced them married, Lucas kissed his bride with a tenderness that made more than one woman in the congregation dab at her eyes. They walked out of the church hand in hand, married and happy and ready to face whatever challenges the mountain country threw at them. The celebration at the community hall lasted until dawn, with music and dancing and more food than any gathering needed. Old Pete gave a rambling speech about love and perseverance that made very little sense but was delivered with such enthusiasm that everyone applauded anyway. Widow Martinez presented them with an enormous batch of tamales and detailed instructions for reheating that Jessica promised to follow exactly. The other ranchers offered advice and ribald jokes about married life that made Lucas shake his head and Jessica blush. As the party wound down and the first light touched the eastern mountains, Lucas and Jessica slipped away, riding together toward the ranch that was now theirs in partnership, if not legal deed. They had decided to spend their first weeks as a married couple at the expanded house, using the time to settle into their new life before the summer work demanded all their attention. The house welcomed them with the smell of fresh wood and new beginnings. Lucas carried Jessica over the threshold, an old tradition that made her laugh and protest that she was perfectly capable of walking. But he held her close, his face buried in her hair, and said quietly, I have been waiting so long to have someone to come home to. Let me have this moment. So Jessica held still in his arms, letting him carry her into their home, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek and knowing she had found something rare and precious. They had both been alone, both been fighting against the world's weight, but now they had each other, and that made all the difference. Their wedding night was tender and slightly awkward, two people who had been alone so long, learning to be together in the most intimate way. But love covered the awkwardness, and genuine affection transformed nervousness into connection. They came together slowly, learning each other's bodies with the same careful attention they had brought to building the chicken coop, seeking what worked and adjusting what did not. By morning, they lay tangled together in the marriage bed Lucas had built with his own hands, exhausted and happy and absolutely certain they had made the right choice. The first year of their marriage passed in a blur of work and discovery. They divided their time between Jessica's cabin and Lucas's house, managing both properties with combined effort that made the work lighter for both. Jessica's chickens expanded to 2 dozen, then 3, their eggs becoming a reliable source of income. Lucas taught her about cattle, patient with her initial fear and celebrating when she successfully helped deliver her first calf. They worked from dawn to dusk through the summer, putting up hay and mending fences and managing the endless tasks that kept a ranch running. But they also made time for joy, for quiet evenings on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains, for stolen kisses in the barn, for laughter over meals and conversation that ranged from practical to profound. They learned each other's rhythms, the way Lucas woke before dawn, and Jessica was sharp-tongued until her second cup of coffee. How Lucas needed silence to think, and Jessica processed by talking through problems. They learned to fight fair, to apologize when wrong, to choose partnership over pride. In December, a full year after Lucas had first found Jessica building in the snow, they discovered she was pregnant. The news came with a mix of joy and terror, both acutely aware of the dangers of childbirth in a place so remote from doctors and help. But Jessica was strong and healthy, and the widow Martinez had delivered half the babies in Westcliffe. They would face it together, the same way they faced everything else. Jessica's pregnancy progressed through the winter, and Lucas became almost comically protective, insisting she rest more and work less, hovering whenever she so much as climbed stairs. Jessica tolerated it with amused patience, understanding that his worry came from love and the memory of his own mother, who he had lost too young. She let him fuss and build cradles and prepare the house for their coming child, while she continued to manage what she could of their combined operation. In July of 1884, on a hot afternoon when thunderstorms were building over the mountains, Jessica went into labor. Lucas rode hard for the widow Martinez, then paced the kitchen while the older woman worked with Jessica in their bedroom. The labor was long and hard, and there were moments when Lucas thought he might lose his mind from listening to Jessica's cries and being unable to help. But finally, as evening cooled the day, a baby's wail pierced the air. Widow Martinez emerged with a smile. "You have a son," she announced, "and your wife is tired but healthy. Both did just fine." Lucas entered the bedroom on shaking legs and found Jessica propped against pillows, hair damp with sweat, holding a tiny wrapped bundle. She looked up at him with exhausted triumph. "Come meet your son," she said softly. The baby was impossibly small, red-faced and angry at being thrust into the world. Lucas touched one tiny fist with a wondering finger and felt his son's grip close around it with surprising strength. "He is perfect," Lucas whispered, voice choked with emotion. "You are amazing. I cannot believe you did this." "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time," Jessica said, but she was smiling, pleased with his awe. "We just do not make as much fuss about it as you men seem to think we should." They named him Marcus, after Jessica's father, and the baby settled into their lives with the kind of disruption only an infant could manage. Sleep became a distant memory. Their careful routines dissolved into chaos, and every plan bent around feeding schedules and diaper changes. But watching Jessica nurse their son, seeing the tender way she touched his dark hair and counted his fingers, Lucas felt a completeness he had not known was possible. The community rallied around them, as mountain communities did. Neighbors brought meals and baby clothes and advice that ranged from helpful to absurd. Old Pete showed up with a rattle he had carved himself and a story about raising his own 5 children that lasted over an hour. The widow Martinez checked on Jessica and the baby weekly, pronouncing them both thriving despite Jessica's terrible coffee, which apparently had not improved even slightly with marriage and motherhood. As Marcus grew from infant to baby to active toddler, Jessica and Lucas expanded their operations steadily. They added more cattle, built additional structures, slowly converted Jessica's original 40 acres and Lucas's adjoining property into one of the more successful ranches in the valley. Jessica kept her chickens and added geese, selling eggs and poultry meat that became known for quality. Lucas broke horses on the side, developing a reputation for patience and skill that brought buyers from as far as Colorado Springs. The work was endless and exhausting, but they did it together, sharing the burden and the triumphs. Marcus learned to walk, chasing chickens around the yard, learned to talk in the particular blend of his parents' speaking styles, grew into a sturdy boy with his mother's determination and his father's steady temperament. They were happy in the way that people who work hard for everything they have are happy, with satisfaction earned rather than given. When Marcus was 3, Jessica became pregnant again. This time the process felt less terrifying, though no less dangerous. They had been through it once and survived, and Jessica was confident in her body's ability to do what needed doing. The second pregnancy was easier than the first, and in April of 1888, she delivered a daughter they named Laura, after no one in particular, but because they both liked the sound of it. Laura proved to be as different from her brother as possible while still being related. Where Marcus was cautious and thoughtful, Laura was fearless and impulsive, crawling and then walking months earlier than her brother had, getting into everything and afraid of nothing. She wrapped her father around her tiny finger from the first moment, and Lucas proved utterly incapable of denying his daughter anything she wanted. You are going to spoil her, Jessica observed, watching Lucas carry 4-year-old Laura on his shoulders while inspecting fence lines. That is what daughters are for, Lucas replied unrepentantly. Sons you teach to be men, but daughters you just love completely and hope they grow up knowing they deserve nothing less from any man they eventually choose. That is actually quite wise, Jessica admitted, though she still cannot have a pony until she is at least 6. 7, Lucas agreed. Maybe 8. We have time to argue about it. They did have time, years of it stretching ahead, full of work and children and the ongoing project of building a life together. Their ranch became one of the valley's fixtures, known for quality stock and honest dealing. Jessica became a leader among the local women, hosting gatherings and organizing assistance for families in need. Lucas served on the town council and helped establish a small school that meant Marcus and Laura and other ranch children could get education without traveling to Cannon City. Their love deepened with the years, moving beyond the initial excitement into something more durable and essential. They had seen each other at their worst, through illness and financial crisis, and the grinding exhaustion of raising children while managing a ranch. They had fought and forgiven, failed and tried again, learned that marriage was not about perfection, but about choosing each other again and again, despite imperfections. On their 10th anniversary, Lucas took Jessica back to the spot where her old chicken coop still stood, now weathered but solid, still housing the great-great-grandchildren of her original hens. This is where it started, he said, pulling her close against him. You trying to build something alone in the snow, too stubborn to quit even when it was clearly going badly. I seem to remember a know-it-all. Rancher criticizing my work, Jessica said, but she was smiling, leaning into his warmth. I seem to remember falling in love the moment you told me to keep riding, Lucas countered. Took me a while to admit it, but I knew right then that you were someone special. We have built a good life, Jessica said, looking out across land that had transformed from raw acreage to working ranch through years of shared effort. The original cabin was now a storage building. The house had been expanded twice, and everywhere she looked were marks of their combined labor. Better than I imagined when I first came here. We are not done yet, Lucas said. Still have to get Marcus through his teenage years without him doing something stupid. Still have to keep Laura from deciding she wants to be a rodeo rider or something equally terrifying. Still have decades of work ahead before this place is what it could be. Good, Jessica said, turning in his arms to kiss him soundly. I would hate to be bored. Marcus grew into a serious young man who loved the ranch as much as his parents did, already talking about expansion and new techniques he had read about in farming journals. Laura remained fearless, declaring at age 12 that she intended to be a veterinarian, a profession that barely existed yet, but which suited her perfectly. They were good kids, growing into good people, proof that love and hard work could create something that lasted beyond one generation. In 1893, a decade after their marriage, Jessica and Lucas stood on their porch watching another snow fall across their land. Marcus was 15 now, tall and capable, doing a man's work around the ranch. Laura was 11, still wild but focused, already helping deliver calves and doctor-sick animals with skill beyond her years. The ranch had prospered. The debts that had hung over Jessica's head when they met were long paid, and they had money in the bank against hard times. Do you ever regret it? Lucas asked, pulling Jessica against him. Staying here instead of going somewhere easier, somewhere with less snow and more help nearby? Not once, Jessica said firmly. This is home. You are home. Everything we built here, we built together, and that makes it worth every hard winter and every difficult season. I love you, Lucas said, the words as true and necessary as the day he first spoke them. I will love you until the mountains wear flat and the creeks run dry. That is a very long time, Jessica observed. Think you can manage it? With you? Lucas said. I think I can manage anything. They stood together as snow erased the world beyond their porch, two people who had found each other in a moment of need and built something permanent from temporary help. The chicken coop still stood behind them, proof that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness, a stranger picking up a hammer on a cold day, could change everything. They had been alone, both of them, fighting separate battles against isolation and hardship. But they had found each other, and in finding each other, they had found home. Years continued to pass, each bringing changes and challenges that Jessica and Lucas faced together. Marcus fell in love with the daughter of a neighboring rancher and married her when he was 22, bringing her to live on the property in a small house they built together, just as Jessica and Lucas had once built a chicken coop. Laura did indeed pursue veterinary medicine, traveling to Fort Collins for training and returning to serve the valley's animals with dedication and skill. She married later to a doctor who settled in Westcliffe, and they had 3 children who spent their summers on the ranch learning the same lessons of hard work and persistence that their grandparents had mastered. Jessica and Lucas grew older together, their dark hair turning silver, their hands increasingly gnarled from decades of labor. But they remained active and engaged, still managing the ranch alongside Marcus, though with gradually diminishing responsibility. They had built something that would outlast them, property and family and community connections that would continue long after they were gone. On a clear autumn evening in 1913, 30 years after Lucas had first ridden up to find Jessica building in the snow, they sat together on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and red. They were both 70 now, grandparents many times over, respected elders in a community they had helped build. Their bodies ached from decades of hard work, but their minds remained sharp, and their love for each other had only deepened with time. Did you ever imagine this? Jessica asked, gesturing to the sprawling ranch, the multiple buildings, the cattle grazing peacefully in the distance, the sounds of family drifting from the various houses. When you picked up that hammer and helped me finish the coop, did you imagine it would lead to all this? Lucas considered the question carefully, as he considered all important things. I imagined that you were someone worth knowing, he said finally. I imagined that helping you might be the start of something, though I did not let myself hope for exactly what. Mostly, I just knew I did not want to ride away and never see you again. I am glad you stopped, Jessica said softly. I am glad you picked up that hammer. I am glad you were stubborn enough to keep coming back even when I was prickly and difficult. You are still prickly and difficult, Lucas pointed out, but he was smiling. That is one of the things I love most about you. And you are still impossibly competent and annoyingly right about construction, Jessica countered, which I have learned to live with mostly. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun completed its descent and the first stars emerged in the darkening sky. Somewhere inside, their daughter-in-law was cooking dinner, and the smell of roasting meat drifted out. Grandchildren's voices rose in argument and laughter, the sounds of life continuing, of family growing, of legacy being built one generation at a time. I have had a good life, Lucas said quietly. Better than I deserved, probably, but exactly what I needed. We have had a good life, Jessica corrected, taking his weathered hand in hers. Built it together from snow and stubbornness and one broken chicken coop. Not bad for a couple of people who started out alone and suspicious of help. Not bad at all, Lucas agreed. They sat together on the porch until the stars filled the sky and someone called them in for dinner. 2 people who had found each other in unlikely circumstances and built a love that had lasted 3 decades and would last until the end. The mountains stood eternal around them. The land they had fought for and transformed spread out beneath the stars, and somewhere in the darkness, an old chicken coop still stood, weathered but solid. Testament to the day, a stranger had picked up a hammer and changed both their lives forever. Inside, surrounded by family and the fruits of their decades of labor, Jessica and Lucas sat at the head of the table and looked at the faces of children and grandchildren, seeing their own stubbornness and love reflected back at them. This was what they had built, not just a ranch or property, but a family rooted deep in mountain soil. People who understood that good things came from hard work and that love was worth fighting for, no matter how difficult the odds. Marcus proposed a toast, raising his glass of apple cider. To my parents, he said, voice warm with affection, who taught us that anything worth having is worth building with your own hands, and that the best partnerships are the ones where both people bring hammers. Everyone laughed and raised their glasses, and Jessica met Lucas's eyes across the table, seeing in them the same creek water clarity that had caught her attention 30 years ago when a stranger criticized her construction and offered to help. She had been so alone then, so determined to need nobody, convinced that independence meant isolation. But Lucas had shown her that true partnership honored independence while ending loneliness, that building beside someone was stronger than building alone. I love you, she mouthed silently across the table. I love you too, Lucas replied, and his smile held 3 decades of shared work and weathered storms, and choosing each other every single day. The years beyond that evening were kind, granting them more time than many people received. They celebrated their 40th anniversary surrounded by family, hosting a party that drew people from across the valley, all coming to honor a couple whose marriage had become something of a local legend. They worked as long as their bodies allowed, then shifted to supervision and advice, trusting Marcus and his capable wife to handle the day-to-day operations while they focused on being grandparents and enjoying the fruits of their lifelong labor. Jessica lived to see Laura become one of the most respected veterinarians in southern Colorado, watched Marcus expand the ranch to nearly 1,000 acres, held great-grandchildren, and told them stories of the old days when their great-grandmother had tried to build a chicken coop in the snow and their great-grandfather had stopped to help. She never lost her stubbornness or her independence, remaining sharp and decisive until the very end. Lucas stayed by her side through everything, just as he had promised on a snowy day 3 decades before when he picked up a hammer and helped a stranger build something that would last. Their love story became the kind that people told at weddings and anniversaries, proof that sometimes the best things in life came from simple acts of kindness and the willingness to build together instead of alone. When Jessica finally passed away at the age of 78, surrounded by family in the house Lucas had built for them, her last words were about the chicken coop, about how she had been so determined to finish it alone until a stubborn rancher had refused to let her fail. Lucas held her hand as she slipped away, his own eyes full of tears but also gratitude for every day they had been given, every challenge they had faced together, every moment of joy and sorrow and ordinary life that had made up their decades together. Lucas lived another 3 years, managing the ranch with Marcus and spending time with grandchildren and great-grandchildren who all carried pieces of him and Jessica forward into the future. He never remarried, never even considered it, because what he had found with Jessica was once in a lifetime, and he was content to carry her memory until they could be together again. When he died at 81, peacefully in his sleep in the bed he had shared with Jessica, the whole valley turned out for his funeral. They buried him next to Jessica in the small cemetery overlooking their ranch, and people came from 3 counties to pay respects to a man who had lived with integrity and loved with his whole heart. The ranch continued under Marcus's stewardship, then eventually passed to his children and grandchildren, remaining in the family for generations. The original chicken coop, by then a century old, was preserved as a family landmark, the place where Lucas and Jessica's story had begun with a hammer and a stubborn woman and a snowstorm. Every generation heard the story, learned about great-great-grandparents who had built something lasting from simple beginnings, who had proven that love and partnership could weather any storm if both people kept picking up hammers and building together. And sometimes, on snowy winter evenings when the light was right, people swore they could see 2 figures standing by that old chicken coop, one tall and capable, one fierce and independent, working side by side the way they always had. It was probably just shadows and imagination, tricks of light and memory. But maybe, in the places where love runs deepest and stories become legend, maybe some things never really end at all.